Hey friend, so here's my question today. Have you ever felt excluded? Were you ever left out? Were you picked last? Some of you weren't. You were always picked first. You were always included. Well, good for you. We're happy for you. Jealous of you, but happy for you. No, I've got some, most of us know the feeling. Some of you know it often. Man, I was picked last so often throughout all elementary school. Found a good group of friends halfway through high school. Definitely was alone for a lot of it. But even in that group of friends, I wasn't as good of singer or dancer or show choir or anything as most others. I didn't get to go on some of the trips and be a part of some of the things. But anyway, we know what it's like to feel excluded. And it's one of the most important things I really want you to know about who Jesus actually is. Because I'm talking about that this whole week, this idea that he's so misunderstood. And it really makes a big difference in our lives and in our spiritual lives, of what you really believe about him. And I think that's one of the biggest things that people get wrong, because maybe you've heard quotes before and surveys before about people saying that they're really interested in Jesus. I know very few people that have an issue with Jesus, even atheists and stuff, that, it's like they respect who he was and like certain things about him. But you hear so many people that say, yeah, I have no problem with Jesus. It's his followers that I have a problem with. And, that often Christians seem so unlike Jesus, and that can be harsh. But certainly I understand why that's been true in a lot of cases. One of the most famous studies done by the Barna Group asked what comes to mind when people think of the word Christian, and top 5 words were pretty harsh words, but they were honest, and most of them center around the idea of just Christians seeming so non-inclusive, so exclusive, so judgmental. In fact, that was one of the words. But when you discover the real Jesus, you realize how incredibly inclusive he really was and is. And I've been challenging you this week, read through the stories of his life, whether you have before or not, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you can read through them with a different angle each time. And I encourage you to look at the angle of who did Jesus include, and you'll see that throughout his life, he included everybody. He included and befriended the really, really poor and also the really rich. He was close friends with women, and back then, sadly, they were often excluded. And he elevated women big time, children as well. They were very excluded, and he included children. He was very inclusive of blue collar and white collar, of the old and the young, of the educated and the uneducated, of people with really checkered past, crazy past, and even of politicians, and even IRS people and tax people. He was so inclusive of all those people. In fact, the only people you see in the stories of his life that he was the hardest on were the really religious people. That's how many people got really frustrated with and got on their case to correct themselves. Not people who didn't follow him and believe in him, but very people who claimed to but weren't acting like it. Even the story of the prodigal son itself ends with Jesus talking about the older brother who didn't want to include the younger brother. And I'll be speaking on that in a few weeks. But listen, so Jesus was very, very inclusive. Here's what I want you to know. This doesn't mean that with Jesus was like, hey, anything goes. No standards. Everybody can just kind of do whatever they want. Doesn't matter how people live. Not what I'm saying, all right? But he was inclusive. He loved people for who they were. And then he got into talking about kind of their lives. Here's been the single most helpful thing to help me understand this. So check it out. That we can tend sometimes as people in churches or people who want to be Christians to kind of have an approach with people like this, that they have to behave first, then they have to believe what I believe, then they can belong. The belonging comes last. We want them to behave the way I think they should behave, and then believe what I think they should believe, and then belong. Jesus actually flipped that on its head and did it completely opposite. He said people get to belong first, then the more they belong and they're around me, I know it will change what they believe, and the more they change their beliefs, I know it'll change their behavior and how they live. I don't know about you, that was mind-blowing to me to think about. I need to work things totally backwards from how I'm used to. Help people belong first, then figure out what they believe, then talk about how they live and behave. And yes, if you decide to make your life about following Jesus, he will call you to a higher standard of living, to not settle for kind of selfishness or different things that we settle for. Instead, call us to be better versions of ourselves and to live more like what he showed us. But he always does it relationally as a friend. It starts with the belonging first. few of my favorite quotes around that. You may have seen this one. It's going around a lot. When you have more than you need, build a bigger table, not a higher fence. Man, even though that's not from the Bible, that so reflects how Jesus was. He was always about a bigger table. And, you know, I love to talk about the people that Jesus ate with. He was always so inclusive in who he ate with. He always had a bigger table. One of my favorite authors, Hugh Alter, says this, says the church of the future is actually going to end up looking way more like the bar scene from Star Wars. I love that. If you remember Star Wars, just whole cast of crazy characters and aliens, people that look like all different things. And he says, yeah, that's what the kingdom of God is meant to look like. That's actually what heaven will look like. He actually had this other quote, and I use it often, and I think it's so powerful. He says, people are not pagans to be converted, projects to be preached at, or demographics to be reprogrammed. Humans should never be generalized, categorized, dismissed, judged, or underestimated. Every person is a story. Every person is a story, rich with history, experiences, creative potential, strengths and weaknesses, clarity and blindness. That's how we're meant to see people, the way Jesus did. I don't have to change my convictions for other people. Doesn't mean that I conform to some of their behavior. You can read stories about Daniel and Joseph in the Bible that they knew how to live out their faith with integrity, but do it around people who weren't like them and love on them and include them. We are just called to love people. Listen, people are never going to accept Jesus if we don't accept him. And so we're meant to love on them.